Hello everybody and welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown channel. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Ruben, who's a professional football scout and analyst. And today we're going to be covering everything we learned from Manchester United 1, Arsenal 1, as the points were shared and the fans were protesting. Right, so there's a lot of outside noise about this game, and I think it made for almost a bit of a weird dynamic when the game kicked off. There's a lot of chanting from United, but the game was a bit slow, and in the first half especially, United was sat very, very deep. Arsenal had the majority of the ball. They were the only ones shooting, and up until Bruno Fernandes' shot, Manchester United didn't have a shot on target before the free kick. So just going to kick it off right away by saying Ruben, Amorim said after the game that when you coach Manchester United, you cannot play too much like this, but the idea is to win games and not just show something to the fans. It's just trying to win a game. Imagine one way to win in this context, so I know it's frustrating for fans sometimes. So when we analyse Ruben Amorim, and obviously I'm going to leave this point on to you, but when we analyse Ruben Amorim, we sort of talked about how, especially in the game they played against Manchester City in the Champions League, how they won the game 4-1, but they can sit incredibly deep and there can be next to no pressure on the ball. And I want to ask you that, even though the second half looked really bright, how frustrating that can be as fans to watch a team that, like Manchester United, sitting on the edge of their own box against Arsenal. Yeah. But what he's trying to accomplish by doing that, and again what he's saying with, we're just trying to win games at this moment in time.
Yeah, so like you mentioned in our analysis, we spoke about it quite a bit. But for me, I think it kind of, a manager that I think back to when I think about this point is Conte and his time at Spurs. And Conte and his time at Spurs, he had a fair bit of success initially to begin with. And then after a period of time, the players became, disenfranchised. The fans didn't like the style of play. And even though it got results, if at any point it didn't get results, you're playing a really sort of pragmatic style of football that appears boring and is hard for players to buy in. That's why I really respect coaches like Simeone, for example, who can get their team to buy into a pragmatic, low possession system for a long period of time. And I think players at the highest level, particularly at Manchester United, players like Bruno Fernandes, for example, players like Garnacho, Amad Diallo, for example, these are all players who kind of want to be on the ball, play. They don't want to do that dirty work deep in their own half for the majority of the game. And for a club of the stature of Manchester United, for fans who have seen United be successful for decades, they don't want to see their team play as the underdogs in the majority of games in order to get their results. Now, what we've seen from Amorim and his time at Manchester United so far is he struggled to pick up points, but the games that he has won or picked up points in seem to be the more difficult games on paper, like sort of Manchester City's. They played well against Liverpool, Arsenal, for example, and these all happen because in their setup deeper, in that sort of rigid 5-4-1 that they deploy against these big teams, they tend to block space really well, and they do have good, threats on the counter. Garnacho, I thought, particularly in that first half, was quite good against Calafiori, and he had Calafiori sort of second-guessing himself. Obviously, Calafiori came off in the latter part of the game as well. He misses the final action, and we know that that's a thing that Garnacho could improve on. But Bruno Fernandes as well had some moments to try and play that final pass, and it didn't always come off, but they were making good opportunities. So in those situations, they're a team that are set up fairly well to take advantage of opposition who pen them in. But when you're playing against a team sort of in the bottom half, I don't think players or fans would reconcile with the fact that, look, we're letting a team like Southampton or we're letting a team like Ipswich have more of the ball against us at Old Trafford. I think it's not sustainable in the long run. I think Amorim appreciates that, but in his sporting side, I think in more games that I'm comfortable with, he did deploy a system like that. So people always say, is it personnel or is it his system? Yeah. I would probably throw that question back to you. What do you think? Because people were asking me that, and I think it's a really interesting one. I think obviously both are involved, but what would you pinpoint that down to?
It's a really boring answer, but I think both of them, the combination of both of them is a real big problem. I think after the game, Ruben Amorim spoke about the use of Casemiro, Victor Lindelof. I think he singled them out in the press conferences, and he said Victor Lindelof played central centre-back in the back three because he didn't want him to be physically extorted by these long, runs that the wide centre-halves have to make in the channels if United are retreating, stepping out into midfield. Casemiro as well, as we've seen at Real Madrid and as we've seen in Ten Hag's first season, plays better when he's, covered around a good couple of players and he can drop into zones and pick up balls. And I think he won 9 tackles in the game against Arsenal, which is his most in a game for a long, long time. And he mentioned the characteristics of the team, and I think that is the most important thing that's going on right now at Manchester United, is that he always says that we can't play like this, like we have to make that step forward, but he's actually fighting for points, for they're trying to get buy-in from the players, and without points, you can't really do that. We've seen managers like Ange Postecoglou, for example, who is refusing to change these massive principles, like his shape, the double inverted fullback, stuff like that. This, ridiculously high pressing, playing out from the back at all costs. And when you're not winning games, it's really hard to get the personnel on side for that. So what Manchester United are doing is they're playing with the same principles, but they're also sacrificing a little bit against the better teams to try and get more points, to try and get more goals, and then to try and obviously breathe that confidence into the players. And I think we've seen it work at times. Obviously, I wouldn't compare this Arsenal game to the Liverpool and City game, because I actually thought the quality on the ball we showed in both of the other two games were better. Yeah. And I think that's another thing that he's also singled out, is that in the first half, Arsenal fans were olaying every long ball from Onana because they know that it's not going to stick to our front line. We're not that type of team. But when we're playing out from the back, again, as we've spoken about, it was this situation where you've got your central centre defender on the edge of the box next to Casemiro. Bruno was up here somewhere, and that's how you mostly play. But this position from Victor Lindelof is, in my opinion, structurally suboptimal. I don't like it. I think it's a waste of a player. I think if Victor Lindelof has got pressure on his back, he's a -1 in build-up, and then Arsenal just have to go man-to-man, and we end up, pinging the ball long. So I think there are some really big structural issues, but I think there's also massive personnel issues. And I think whilst the personnel definitely raises the floor in, and obviously if we had a player like, I don't know, for example, John Stones, for example, who could go into midfield and you would trust him with the ball there, the system itself, the structure itself would look a lot better. Yeah. But at the moment we don't, so it doesn't. And that is just kind of the way the cookie's crumbling at Manchester United. And I think structural issues, they don't just end there. I think, again, we've spoken about how much better the 5-4-1 is when we're going deep like this, instead of having 3 players pressing high. This is far better against better oppositions. It limits the space between the lines. I think when you're up against a 5v5, it's a lot better for these players to track the overloads down the side instead of leaving it purely man-to-man. Again, we said the 5-4-1 is better for this instead of the 5-2-3. But we've seen this limbo effect of Amorim's Manchester United, where we have a positive performance, they change a little bit of the core structures and principles, we drop a little bit deeper, we play a bit different to how we do against the lesser teams, but then we revert back to it. We've got Leicester away at the weekend.
You can't stop like this against Leicester.
Exactly, and that's what I think people need to know. We said it after the game at Anfield. There's certain game plans that Amorim's whipping out in these big games.
The thing is, if you do set up like this against Leicester, you would probably get a result, but just ideologically, just for confidence of the players, just for the, I think it goes back to the Amorim's quote entirely. But
just cannot play like that.
You can't sit in a block this deep as Manchester United against Leicester.
And obviously, Amorim's Premier League record against sides starting the day, so when we play them, if they start the day in the top 6, he's played them 4 times, he's won 1, drew 2 and lost 1, in comparison to sides who are 7th or below at the time of playing. Played 13, won 4, drawn 2 but lost 7. So he's lost 7 and won 4 against the sides in the bottom 14, but he's won 1 out of 4 and drew 2 of the others in the games he's played against the better oppositions. And I think he's now stuck in a position where he doesn't want to sink back onto the edge of the box because he wants to take the step forward. And we've often seen these managers compromise in their principles and to buy results, to buy time. But buying time and results this early in the United job is not a worry, but it's a problem that he knows because he's talking about it openly. But I think in the future, there's going to have to be like a segue into a brighter style of football. And how do you think before we move on to Arsenal and the game itself, how do you think he can take that step up for the rest of the season without the personnel? Do you think there's anything he could do without, because he's not going to change the structure. He can't bring in personnel. I think Aiden Heaven, for example, like he come in, there's a bit of a brighter
really
personnel.
Bright, yeah.
How do you take that next step on this season without the personnel and without the ability to be adaptive and change?
The thing is, I think either you tweak the structure or you tweak the personnel. Like there's not much else in your control aside from empowering the players and fostering this good environment around them. I think at the beginning when he first came in, I was very complimentary about how he spoke in press conferences, but under the pressure of the Man United job so far, there's been times where he's gone back on criticising players, and not in the most sort of nasty way, but it's not necessarily a way that drives home confidence. When Jurgen Klopp came in, I think the way that he spoke about his players starkly different to how Amorim is. And if you're not tweaking the structure, if you're not changing the personnel, the least you can do is get your fans on side and empower your players publicly and protect them in that way. He does fall back on talking a little bit about like, oh look, maybe that's my fault or maybe that's the reason that we've not done it. But it almost comes across a little bit self-defeatist. And I think, look, don't be overly confident, but also don't drive home this negativity publicly as the Man United manager. Almost have this cheery kind of, hard-working mentality in how you speak. I think that's one thing that you can do. Secondly, if I do talk about a structure, when you sit in a 5-4-1, I think it's really impressive. But when you do press up, the 5-2-3 at the moment is just kind of not working. And I think when you do push higher, press in a 4 something and then drop back into a 5 at the back shape, I think that's a very sensible solution. And then personnel wise, I think players are struggling with spacing and understanding the relationships between their teammates in a 5 at the back system because they're not used to it. If you were to put a team together in a sort of 4-2-3-1 shape, the players have played in that shape across different clubs over many years, so they understand, look, a player's probably going to be in that zone, a player's probably going to jump and cover that man. In a 5 it's hard, but if that's his system, I think he should persevere with it and just hone in specifically on individual training and coaching of players, knowing when they should jump and when they should move and how they should interact in certain zones. I know he's trying to keep players fit and not have them be injured, but I think fostering relationships between sub-units. Now, if you look at that triangle there, having sort of a consistency in the 3 players that play there, or having a consistency in the 3 players that play there, they will then develop a relationship where this player knows, okay, my centre-back's going to jump here, I can cover wide, or I know that the wide player's going to jump here, I can drop in. And that sort of chemistry between sub-units in teams, I think, is really underrated. And something that we need to kind of foster more. Yoro's played on left, played on right, Mazraoui's played right side, left side, Dallow's played both sides, Lindelof's now coming to the middle, Dillick's played all 3 centre-back positions. So you need a bit of consistency in your selection, and then in the last 15-20 minutes, bring on your fresh legs and manage your legs in that way, I would say.
If you're enjoying the video and want more tactical analysis and podcasts, please press the subscribe button below and hit the bell to enable post notifications. Okay, now moving on into Mikel Arteta's Arsenal and some of the struggles they actually had in this game. And it sounds a bit ridiculous because in this game they looked toothless after beating PSV 7-1 midweek. But according to Opta, the XG in the PSV game was only 1.84 in favour of Arsenal. So I want you to speak about how there's a big talking point with Arsenal right now with the goal scoring. It's a bit like they're struggling to break down. Obviously, they lost to West Ham 1-0. Didn't score in that game. Forest didn't score in that game. And now, obviously, without the Declan Rice goal, which was a wonderful hit, by the way, from the edge of the box, they did struggle in general to create chances in this game. And I want you to speak about how I've often been really complimentary of the fullbacks for Arsenal this season. Again, I think we've seen it with a bit of Calafiori and a bit of Miles Lewis-Skelly, but versus PSV, I thought the fullbacks were the main reason why Arsenal scored 5 goals. I thought the movement into these pockets were really good. I thought Marino, when he drops in, it really creates this interesting dynamic where it's Arsenal aren't attacking through the centre, they're doing it through the wide areas. But when you're facing a block like this, which is so deep and so compact, why do you think Arsenal are struggling? Bearing in mind, we obviously know Arsenal are missing Kai Havertz and Bukayo Saka, and their front line is completely disintegrated, basically. And we obviously do know about that. And I've actually got some more data before we move on to you. Per game with Bukayo Saka and Havertz starting in the Premier League this season, Arsenal have scored 2.1 goals on average, whereas when both don't start, they score 1.2 goals on average. So it's very clear that they've almost halved their goal return without the main right winger and their main striker. But also, as you can see, the touches in the opposition's box have gone down, the total shots have gone down, obviously the win percentage has gone down, and the XG is down by 0.6. So it's not like they're not just scoring, they're not creating enough either. So I want you to speak on Martin Ødegaard because, in general, if you're missing Bukayo Saka, who is Arsenal's best creator, and Kai Havertz, who is one of Arsenal's best goal scorers, you really look into other players. And Martin Ødegaard in this game in particular did stand out as a bit of a... You looked at what Bruno Fernandes did to just get Manchester United a goal, that game-breaking quality. Why can't Arsenal, deliver that without Bukayo Saka and Havertz at the moment?
Yeah, look, I think we can focus on Ødegaard and we'll get into that as well, but we have to look at the picture in its entirety. I think instead of looking at, instead of just saying, look, Havertz and Saka are out, why are they losing? We have to go and look at the specific qualities that they bring that allow Arsenal to generally win game by game. And I think when we look at Saka and when we look at Havertz, I think a really underrated quality in their game that marries nicely with Ødegaard's quality is how intensely and how coordinated they do press together as a unit. And this is not to say Nwaneri or Merino aren't good at pressing. That they're quite physical in their press, but reading when to press, jumping as a collective, penning teams in. These are all qualities that work better when you have a sub-unit, like I mentioned before, that all understands when to go off of each other. And then you look at the actual profiles of those players. Kai Havertz, what he does brilliantly well is his movement. I think it's his strongest quality, bar none. And Merino and the rest of the front line, I think, Trossard has it. But Merino and Nwaneri, they're players who are trying to get the ball to feet or get the ball for the final action. But they're not necessarily players who are consistently running in behind and stretching the defence, and they're not players who are picking up the ball in areas where they've lost their man. They tend to get the ball either to shoot or score or to kind of create a chance. And Kai Havertz is someone who used to stretch the defensive line brilliantly, pushing them back where the space opens up for like a Declan Rice and that goal that we saw against Manchester United. So one, I think, is primarily a matter of movement, and Kai Havertz was brilliant at that. Bukayo Saka, he was tasked with a ridiculously hard job, and he's been doing it for years. I think we're only appreciating, or people are generally only appreciating, just how impressive he was in his absence, because he was often marked by two players. He would create a chance out of nothing, and in his crossing ability, that in-swinger from that right-hand side lands on, those players crashing at the back post, or your striker or your late running midfielder. With ridiculous precision. You've lost that from your corners as well. The numbers have dropped way down, and I don't think it's because their routines have been massively figured out or anything, but I think it's down to the loss in set piece quality from Bukayo Saka's exclusion. If we focus in on Ødegaard to wrap this section up, I think it's important to note that Ødegaard kind of plays in two separate ways. Sometimes he drops off outside of the opposition's block, he picks the ball up, and then he looks forward to kind of create something and control the game a little bit deeper. And I don't mind him in that position. I kind of like him in that position, because then he can get the ball without interfering too much with Bukayo Saka. Bukayo Saka has the space, the room to try and create what he needs to create. And as a 2, and often with Ben White or Timber as a 3, that really works well. But what you're seeing now in his absence is Ødegaard's going back to sort of his role that he used to play when he scored a lot of goals, and that's sort of picking it up in zone 10 and trying to get those shots off early from that area. Now, in doing so, I think that's a very viable use of his skill set, but the team around him need to be able to get the ball to him in that area, and the back line need to be pushed back so he's able to pick it up in that area. So Merino's not pushing the opposition back. Your wingers aren't driving quickly and with the intent to push the opposition line back, so that space for Ødegaard is reduced as well. And then are your players behind Ødegaard finding him in those spaces? Partey's quite aggressive in his pass selection, but against a 4-man midfield, it's very hard to get through into those central areas. So then your chance creation comes from out wide, and they don't have the personnel there to be as successful as they have been.
Yeah, I'm not going to be too worried about Arsenal because, as we did mention, they have got, not the current starting striker and the current starting right winger. But I think there is some problems where I think people are often looking now to Martin Odegaard as he's the captain. Same way people look at Bruno Fernandes. It's like, right, we need you to now do something to get us out of this rut. And obviously, he's not delivering that at the moment. And I think 3 games in the Premier League, having scored only 1 goal, is a big issue. Yeah. Whether or not, obviously, they beat PSV 7-1, as I've mentioned at the top of this section. But for me, it's really hard to watch Arsenal against these deeper blocks. I think they're really, really passive, and I think that, again, that comes from what Mikel Arteta is trying to do. He said in the press conference after the game, they're not efficient in the last 20 metres of the pitch, and it's like, I don't really know what they could do more with the current situation and set up what they're doing.
They've been like this for a long time, in the sense that they're
so
very
risk-averse. They're so risk-averse.
And then the individual quality and the fine margins of the corners and set pieces tends to bail them out because they've got such good players in those areas. Yeah,
because he's saying that they're not efficient, but there also isn't a large quantity of freedom allowed to, Saka used to pick up the ball here, cross it in. Martinelli's got his freedom to run at players, but in the current front line, there's not really much X factor in there, and that's why I really like how Arteta turned to Timber, Calafiori, Lewis Skelly to be them late box runners. He uses Calafiori different to how he uses Lewis Skelly, so there's a clear sort of tweaking of whoever the personnel is. He uses Calafiori as if he's like running into the box from fullback half the time. I've seen Calafiori pop up in this space again against United. Lewis Skelly, he's almost in the middle waiting for the ball to receive it to then work a little situation with these combinations. Timber's the same. He scored a back post header, usually where you'd expect your right winger to be against PSV. But in this current situation, when you are in set possession against set defence, there isn't much for Arsenal X factor player quality to bail them out of these situations. And I can't say that Mikel Arteta is, letting them have the ability to do that all the time. I think there is X factor and player quality which really does get them out. You mentioned before corners. They've scored 7 goals from corners in their first 101 corners in the first 15 Premier League games of the season, but since then only 3 in 85. And obviously that comes down to Bukayo Saka's quality on the delivery. But without them players, it really does, again, talk about how important the player quality is. And if you don't have I said if you don't have them pulling rabbits out of a hat, because that is what they're doing in these game states. They are, doing something that isn't expected to happen at that moment. And that is what Bukayo Saka's done all season this season and all season last season.
I think they're lacking a player from deep who can kind of ping a pass like a Trent, a De Bruyne. I'm naming all-time quality players.
Like a lock picker, someone who can
just someone from these areas, or even if you sort of deep reset, is there somebody who can play your long pass into someone running in behind? It seems like an Arteta side is very risk-averse. You've got profiles that are incredible at winning duels and preventing opposition from getting any chance of scoring. They have high possession. They set up to pen teams completely in. But once they're in this situation, Arteta seems to, and obviously this is not true, but it seems to look like the instructions are, look, I've got you to this point. Now it's up to you to, with 80 minutes of the game, win the game for me. Because everything else is set up to prevent the opposition from having any control.
I don't disagree with that kind of aspect of what he's saying.
But that's why they've drawn 10 games.
But that is, because
I said at the start of the season, Arsenal are the best team in the world at not losing. But I wouldn't bank on them winning.
Go win a game.
If they'd lost a couple more games in chasing a win, they'd be higher in the table at the moment. They've won 15, drawn 10. I think they've lost 3. They've only lost 2 more games than Liverpool, but they're massively, off them in the league because of these draws. They're not, in being risk averse, they don't lose, and that's brilliant for a cup team. I wouldn't be surprised to see them make a deep run in the Champions League because they play in that fashion. But in the Premier League, you need.
They're just not going the extra yard. Is that what you're saying?
I'd rather lose a couple of games in chasing a victory. But in being risk-averse, that's kind of his philosophy. And in theory, on the numbers, it all makes sense. But you kind of need a bit of... you need to cheat the numbers a little bit.
It doesn't make that much sense on the numbers either, because their expected goals value at the moment is not great.
Well, that's because they've lost the quality.
I know that, but the quality isn't they're not blowing teams out the water in the Premier League. It's really, honestly, every single time I'm saying this, I'm like, they did just beat Thingy 7-1, but I can't, like, in the Premier League, they are struggling to score goals.
But they're conceding basically nothing as well.
Yeah, I know.
I think their philosophy is primarily based on, if we concede nothing in 90 minutes with most of the ball, we should score at least one.
Yeah. Do you think he's become more risk averse as the years have gone on because of how fine the margins are that he's lost these titles in? Do you think, like, last season, the season before, he's almost a bit scarred by it?
But I think Arsenal fans talk about, I can't remember the season specifically, it might be in 2022, where they talk about sort of Zinchenko was in the side and they're playing very free-flowing, attacking football. And then they tried to go toe-to-toe with Manchester City, and Manchester City were extremely dominant in that game. I think both Pep and Arteta have kind of been scarred a little bit about, like, by those games in which the games have been really open and you've kind of been picked apart. The increase of physicality in the league, the individual player quality. I understand why they've gone a bit more risk averse, but I think there's value in playing a bit risky and playing on the quality of your best players.
Yeah.
Because Arteta's Arsenal might finish second for 10 years in a row because they're so solid and consistent, but would you rather not finish fourth a couple of seasons and win the title another season? I think Slot's kind of given that sort of alternative argument. So it's a hard one. I think you need to balance risk aversion and these players who are really good at controlling the games, but also football's a game about being risky and kind of letting the players figure it out.
I think there's a really big problem that Arsenal don't have to address, but it feels like every time I watch him, and he's saying in the press conference after the game they're giving away too many transitions, which means again he still wants more.
But it looks like
wants more control. But there's nothing. They're standing on the ball, they're working around the block, and it feels like they're killing territory and they're getting to the line and they're putting balls into the box like every so often. But if he's still worried about the transitions going the other way, that means in his head he's only thinking about making this side even more.
In his head he thinks, look, if Bruno doesn't get that free kick, we're fine.
Yeah, like if Man United doesn't have the transition there, they win that game 1-0. That's basically what he's thinking in his head. But in my opinion, the second half I can understand because we had a lot more transitions in the first half. But I just don't see where the goals are going to come from at the moment. It's really problematic.
I think an Arteta side, in how it's built, if you've got the individual player quality to exploit the situation, he will win a trophy.
Yeah.
So I feel recruitment's let him down a little bit.
Yeah, I do sympathise with him as well, because I think in the way they play, I don't think we should be having. I think Trossard's a great goal scorer. I'm not going to say he's a great player because when I watch him, I don't think he impacts the game overall, but I think he's a good goal scorer. I think if they had another couple of goal scorers in the team, if they had someone popping up, I know Declan Rice scored in this game, but they've signed Marino, they play him up front, who's a goal-getting midfielder, but Ødegaard's not really having a great goal-scoring season. Partey scored, I don't know how many goals, but then the centre-halves, Gabriel scored a few, but it's like I think in the front line, there's not many. And I do sympathise with him because they've gone and got Raheem Sterling, who hasn't clicked. Martinelli looked like he was coming back into it, got a setback. And I think they're missing a forward player to get the goals. And I think at the moment it's making Arsenal look really hard to watch. Right, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that joint analysis of Manchester United and Arsenal's good and bad during this week's Premier League game. If you did enjoy, please don't forget to like, comment and follow the channel. And we'll be back next week. We'll see you later.